So, hello and welcome to the part 2 of our group presentation in 21st in African literature. So, continuing, I'm going to discuss about African poetry. So, poetry may be defined as an artistic, imaginative creation of African people account of their social, cultural, political, religious, economic, and historical perspectives at a given time and place presented in rhythmic way of written expression. Use of concrete images derived from the fauna and flora, proverbs, indigenous rhythms, verbal tropes, and concepts of space and time to establish a poetic form. So, African poetry is a diverse and vibrant literary tradition that draws on the rich cultural, linguistic, and historical tapestry of the continent. Rooted in oral traditions, it reflects the multitude of African cultures and explores themes such as nature, social and political issues, identity, spirituality, and resilience. With a strong connection to the oral tradition, African poets often infuse their works with rhythmic music and dance. The poetry celebrates the continent's diversity, addresses historical and contemporary challenges, and serves as a powerful medium for cultural expression and commentary. African poets. Leopold Sedar Senghor was a prominent Senegalese poet, philosopher, and politician. He played a significant role in shaping African literature, particularly through his contribution to the concept of negritude. Negritude is a literary and ideological movement that emerged in the 1930s, emphasizing pride in African identity, culture, and heritage. And here are his works: Chants de Ombre, or Song of Shadow. This collection reflects Senghor's exploration of African identity and heritage. He expresses the tension between traditional African values and the influence of Western colonization. And in this seminal collection, Senghor delves into the complexities of African identity in the face of colonialism. He artfully explores the shadows cast by the clash between traditional African values and the encroachment of Western influences. The poem reflects a poignant struggle for cultural autonomy, with Senghor expressing the challenges and nuisance of reconciling the rich heritage of Africa with the changes brought by the colonialism. Through evocate verses, he captures the essence of a people grappling with the shadows of their past and the challenges of an evolving present. Hostis Noires, or Black Host. This work delves into the themes of spiritually mysticism and the relationship between Africa and African diaspora. Senghor explores the interconnectedness of Black people globally. So, Hostis Noires continues Senghor's exploration of the African diaspora and spirituality. The poems in this collection delve into the mysticism of Black identity, celebrating the interconnectedness of people of African descent worldwide. Senghor draws on the spiritual and cultural elements to emphasize a shared heritage, fostering a sense of solidarity among Black communities. The work is a lyrical journey that transcends geographical boundaries, connecting the experience of Black individuals and communities in a celebration of their resilience, spirituality, and cultural richness. Ethiopian poems. Senghor draws inspiration from Ethiopian civilization and culture. The poems celebrate African history and its contribution to world civilization. Inspired by Ethiopian civilization, Ethiopics stands as a testament to Senghor's commitment to celebrating Africa's historical contributions. The poem in this collection draw from the wellspring of Ethiopian culture, showcasing Senghor's admiration for an ancient civilization and its enduring impact. Through vivid imagery and poetic language, Senghor elevates Africa's place in world history, emphasizing its role in shaping the global cultural landscape. Ethiopics is a lyrical exploration of African excellence and a call to recognize and honor the continent's profound historical legacy. So, number two is Soyinka is a Nigerian playwright, poet, and essayist who has made significant contributions to African literature. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1986, becoming the first African laureate. Soyinka's works often explore the complexities of African identity, politics, and culture. And here are his works. A Shuttle in the Crypt. This collection of poems delves into the themes of death, oppression, and the impact of political turmoil on individuals. It reflects Soyinka's concern about the state of his nation and the struggles faced by its people. A Shuttle in the Crypt contributes to African literature by addressing socio-political issues with a deep understanding of cultural nuances, showcasing the poet's commitment to using his art for social commentary. Number two, Idanre and Other Poems. The title Idanre is an exploration of Yoruba people's cultural and historical roots, drawing on the mythology and symbolism of the Idanre Hills. The collection as a whole addresses themes of exile, identity, and the impact of colonialism. Through Idanre and Other Poems, Soyinka contributes to African literature by weaving together traditional Yoruba elements with modern poetic forms, creating a unique blend that reflects the complexities of post-colonial African identity. Number three, A Dance of the Forest. Originally written for Nigeria's independence celebration, this play explores the tension between tradition and modernity. It features a rich tapestry of characteristics and symbolic elements that represent Nigeria's cultural and political landscape. A Dance of the Forest contributes to African literature by using drama to engage with the challenge of nation building and the complexities of forging a post-colonial identity. It reflects Soyinka's commitment to exploring African themes on the theatrical stage. Number four, Death and King's Horseman. This play is based on historical events and explores the clash between Yoruba tradition and British colonial authority. It tells a story of Elysin, the king's horseman, and his tragic fate as he prepares for ritual suicide. A Death and King's Horseman is a powerful contribution to African literature as it addresses the clash between cultural traditions and colonial influences, highlighting the complexity and consequences of such interactions. Number three, John Pepper Clark, a Nigerian poet and playwright who made a significant contributions to African literature. He was associated with the first generation of Nigerian poets who wrote in English and played a crucial role in shaping the literary landscape. And here are his works: A Reed in the Tide. This collection of poems reflect on the impact of colonialism and the struggle for independence in Nigeria. Clark exposes themes such as identity, tradition, and the clash between the old and the new. Mm. Clark's poetry serves as a potent medium for social and political commentary, providing a nuanced understanding of Nigerians' historical and contemporary challenges. His verses illuminate the complexities of navigating post-colonial identities and impact of political events on individual communities. And then Casualties poem. In this collection, Clark responds to the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War. The poem depicts the horrors and human suffering resulting from the conflict, capturing emotional and psychological toll on the people. And through his exploration of cultural themes, Clark contributes to the discourse on the preservation of African cultural heritage. His work highlights the tension between the tradition and modernity, offering insights into the evolving nature of African identity in the face of external influences. State of the Union. Clark continued to address socio-political issues in Nigeria in this collection. The poems reflect on the challenges facing the nation and the need for social and political change. Number 4, Mandela and Other Poems. This collection celebrates the struggle against apartheid in South Africa and pays tribute to Nelson Mandela. Clark expresses solidarity with the anti-apartheid movement and the quest for justice and equality. So the next slide will be presented by Mr. Makasinan.
So, Dangal greetings. I am Kurt Vincent Masinag and I will be discuss the before the modernization of African literature. Next slide, please. So first, oral storytelling was integral to African cultures. However, colonialism introduced Western educations and languages, leading to a shift from oral traditions to written forms. The modernizations of African literature began in the mid-20th century, with writers and intellectuals expressing their experience through written words, marking the African literary renaissance or African literary awakening. Next slide, please. Characteristic works African literature. Originating from northern and sub-Saharan African, has a broad scope of productions including English and African languages. Early African writings often shared folk tales and legends, providing guidance and cultural history. Later, African literature expanded to include hymns, romance, epic, poetry, fictionals, and narratives, philosophies, and autobiographies. An example of the slave narrative is the interesting narrative of the life of Olada Equano of Gustav Vasa, the African published in 1789. This vivid and horrifying of image of the slave trade. In the 20th century, African literature focused on the themes of protests, decrying colonizations, and calling for independence, with writers like Othman Simban and Chinua Achebe expressing pride in their past and hope for the future. Next slide, please. The pre-colonial era. The African pre-colonial literature is described as a reflection of the purest African life that is completely free from the influences of the white colonizer. The oral tradition Like any other places in the world, the literature of African began with their oral traditions, the prose and verse that were passed down from generations to generations through words of mouth. The oral traditions was the way of African tribes to educate their children about their culture, histories, values, legends, and arts. These are undiluted African originals, which include myths and folktales, epics and proverbs, idiom phrases, poems, dramas, and songs, musics, and customs derived from the African way. Next slide, please. The colonial and pre-independence period. The colonial and pre-independence period in African literature reflects a complex interplay of cultural, social, and political dynamics. Writers during this era grappled with the impact of colonialism, often exploring themes of identity, resistance, and the clash between traditionals and Western values. Notable works include Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart and Nugigwa Ting Oa Weep Not Child, which illuminate the challenge and transformations experienced by African societies. These writings laid the foundation for the rich diversity of post-independence African literatures. That's it. Thank you. And the next slide will be discussed by Lawrence Saldo.
Thank you, Mr. Makasinad. So now let's talk about the modern African literature. Next slide, please. So, the modern African literature. The modern experience of Africa comes from the traumatic colonial evidence, violence of the West, and the struggle towards national identity. So, yung statement na to, parang sinasabi talaga na yung contemporary experience ng Africa is shaped significantly by two main factors. Unang-una ay yung traumatic and violent impact ng colonialism na inabuso ng Western power. Mainly, example nito ay yung slavery and yung racism. And meron pang ibang factors like economic policies, that was adopted by the Europeans who destroyed the colonies rather than help them. And Africa was damaged, like severely damaged economically, politically, and culturally. And Africa's traditional lifestyle and culture were destroyed. Kasi yun nga, yung Western powers had like very, very, very little to no interest in traditional African culture. And so does, same din to sa mga tao ng Africa. So dahil dito naipon yung internal intentions and conflict, and once na they were considered as an independent country without Western powers holding them back, they struggled to forge a common identity dahil sa pang-aabuso sa kanila ng Western powers in the past. So, next is the modern African writing serves as a movement toward restoration and rediscovery of African culture and thinking. So, paano nga ba ginamit yung modern African writing to restore and rediscover African culture? So, yung mga modern African writers, kumuha sila ng, let's say, ng inspiration largely from the experience after the colonization ng Africa. So, basically, ginamit ng modern African writers yung past to provide an insights or on what happened during those dark times. And yung mga works nila ay nag-serve as a dynamic movement toward restoring and rediscovering African culture by providing a platform for authentic culture representation, language revitalization, historical reconstruction, and critical engagement with contemporary issues. So, the next slide, please. So, major themes used in modern African literature. So, according to Ali Mazrui, a writer and professor on African studies, ano yun? There are 7 major themes used in African literature produced after the colonization. So, number 1 is the clash between Africa's past and present, the clash between tradition and modernity, the clash between indigenous and foreign, the clash between individualism and communism, individualism and community rather, the clash between socialism and capitalism, the clash between development and self-reliance, and lastly, the clash between Africanity and humanity. So, yung mga themes na to na naisip ni Ali Mazrui are produced after the colonization. So, nag-offer ito ng comprehensive lens through which to furthermore understand yung complexities and yung complexities and yung struggles ng post-colonial African societies. And through these themes, nagkakaroon tayo ng insights into the ongoing narrative between the past and the present ng Africa and yung the local government, and the local and the global misconceptions on African culture and its literature. So, and ginagamit din tong mga major themes na to to have a deeper appreciation para sa African literary expressions in the post-colonial context. So the next slide will be represented by Mr. Llamoso, which is the well-known literary pieces of modern African literature.
Thank you, Mr. Haldo. Now, let's talk about the the most notable African writers you should be reading. The first the first writers is Chinua Achebe. Must be mentioned whenever African literature is discussed. His two best known books, Things Fall Apart and No Longer at Ease, have left an indelible mark on African literature. Achebe's work is a length, lengthy meditation on colonialism and its consequences for the individuality and identity of Africans, caught between two worlds, traditional and Western society, to which they cannot fully belong. He is one of Africa's most famous writers, and many people expected him to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Regrettably, he did not receive the award prior to his death in 2013. His most notable work is Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart, perhaps the best known African novel in the English speaking world. Things Fall Apart tells the story of pre-colonial life in a village in southern Nigeria and the cultural shock that came with the arrival of the British at the end of the 19th century. This novel is fascinating in many ways. In the glimpse he provides into a past and unrecognizable world and culture. In what he recounts and depicts, in the universalism of the remarks and the reflection on upheavals that communities can be confronted with. Achebe does all this without falling into the nostalgia of the past or blindly promoting the merits of progress. Please, next slide. Next slide po. The second writer is Ngugi wa Chong-o. The writings of Kenyan author Ngugi wa Chong-o are published in both English and Kikuyu at the University of California. He serves as both a professor and the head of the International Center for Writing and Translation. Ngugi is one of East Africa's most well-known intellectuals. Denunciations of colonialism, conflicts between black and white people, and communities split between the impact of European and African cultures are major themes in his work. Ngugi addresses these subjects in his debate book Whip Not Child via the perspective of the Kikuyu rebels fighting against the English government. However, it was the 1967 publication of A Grain of Wheat that catapulted him to international fame. international fame. Ngugi's 1986 essay Decolonizing the Mind bid, bids farewell to decades of writing novels in English. His most notable work is A Grain of Wheat. A Grain of Wheat is the novel that gained Ngugi international acclaim and a place among the most successful African writers of the 20th century. It tells a number of intertwined stories that take place during Kenya's fight for independence. The main plot follows a seemingly calm and solitary young man as he and his home village prepare to celebrate Uhuru Day, Kenyan in or Kenyan Independence Day. But in the background, former members of the resistance prepare to execute a traitor who had betrayed them during the fight. Next slide. The last writer is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is just 42 years of 42 years of age. However, she is as of now perceived as one of the main African essay, essayists of her age. Brought up in Nigeria prior to concentrating on in the US, Adichie began her vocation to some approval with purple hibiscus. Yet it was her subsequent novel, a big part of A Yellow Sun, that established her standing as an essayist. She followed that with Americana, which handled issues of bigotry, women's rights, and social evacuating with humor and self-scorn. She is the best she is the best known for her fiction, but her short essay We Should All Be Feminists is also popular and is given to every Swedish high school student every year. In 2017, Fortune magazine positioned Adichie as one of the individual 50 most powerful individuals on the planet. Her most notable work is Half of a Yellow Sun. Half of a Yellow Sun, told from three perspectives. Half of a Yellow Sun is about the human impacts of a Biafran War, also known as the Nigerian Civil War. First is Ugu, a 13 years old boy who works as a houseboy for a professor of mathematics, Odenigbo. Second is Olana, who is who is married to Odinigbu and estranged from her parents after they try to offer her as a bribe to advance their business interests. As war breaks out, Olana and Odinigbu are forced to flee from their homes because they're seen as socialists. Lastly is Olana's sister, Kainin, who starts the novel involved in her parents' business and even profits of the war, but later becomes disillusioned by the violence and chooses to run and refugee camp in order to help others. Like other novels mentioned here, much of the struggle in these books comes from the impossible position American countries were put in during the century, Adichie was raised during the aftermath of the Biafran War and said she felt the need to address the specter and historical violence in her writing.
So, going back to, to Chinua's Acheputang. Wait. So, going back to Chinua's Achebe's, going back to Chinua's Achebe's work, Things Fall Apart. So, published in 1958, recognized as the finest novel written about life in Nigeria at the end of 19th century. Considered the most widely read African novel and is structured in three parts. So, the next slide. So, Things Fall Apart, presents presents the African's perspective and history through the eyes of African characters and yung mga challenges and yung mga struggles na narratives ng during the colonial period. So, a bit of context about sa story na to. So, yung novel's main character, which is si Okonkwo, a very respected and high status in the Igbo village sa Umuofia. And may tatay siya na may reputation na weak and unsuccessful, and determined siya to be everything his own father only ever dream of. So, ano siya? So, may anak din siya na si Nyowe, ay si No No Woye. So, may anak siya na parang feminine. Basta si Okonkwo kasi is ayaw niya sa weak, ayaw niya sa ganito kasi nahihiya talaga siya dun sa reputation ng father niya which is weak and unsuccessful. So, ayaw niya talaga sa mga ganon pero hindi niya kayang pagalitan yung si Woye kasi sarili niyang anak yon. And maya't maya may nakilala siyang bata which is si Ikemefuna na hardworking, parang super similar siya kay Okonkwo. So, ang ginawa niya, inadapt niya. And then after that, nung inadapt niya siya, ang gustong itawag kay Ikemefuna ay father, pero ang gusto ko ni Okonkwo is ano, parang keep it professional lang. So, ayaw niyang tawagin siyang like father para ayaw niya kasi namang may close relationship siya. Tapos, yun, naging role model ni Woye si Ikemefuna dahil nga, yun nga, kasi ang taas ng tingin sa kanya ng tatay niya. Ay, ang taas ng tingin ni Ikemefuna dun sa tatay niya. And then, yung may one time na si Ezeudu, yung matandang lalaki dun sa, sa baba, siya si Ezeudu, may oracle na tinatawag. Kumbaga parang ito, yung oracle is about, may sinabi si Ezeudu kay Okonkwo about something related sa oracle, which is yung prophecy na wino-worship ng mga tao sa Igbo village. And the prophecy says that Ikemefuna must be killed. So, kailangan patayin sabi dun sa oracle, kailangan mapatay si Ikemefuna for some reason. Pero hindi kailangan involved or Okonkwo should not be involved because, yan nga, nagkaroon sila ng close relationship. So, yon, sinabi ni Okonkwo kay Ikemefuna na pupunta siya sa home village niya. Pero ang nangyari talaga habang naglalakad sila, trap lang pala yon. And then si Ikemefuna ay pinatay ng tatlong tribesmen na sakop ni Okonkwo. And then after that, na fall sa state ng depression si maya't maya na fall sa state sa depression si Okonkwo kasi no, na-guilty siya in a way kay Ike Mapuna kasi ang ano niya, egoistic kasi siya. Ayaw niyang makikita siya na weak ng mga tribesmen niya. So kapag dinefy niya yung yung prophecy ng oracle, magmumukha siyang mahina. So ang ginawa niya, wala siyang choice kundi ipapatay si Ike Mapuna. And then after nun, na-fall siya sa state of depression. And then um, maya't maya, mas lalong na-fall siya sa state of depression dahil nga nagkasakit yung babae niyang anak na galing sa second wife niya. And then, after nun, nung maya't maya namatay din si Ezeudu, and then, parang nagkaroon siya ng galit kay Ezeudu. So, ang ginawa ni Akonko, pumunta siya dun sa funeral ni Ezeudu. And then after nun, kumuha siya ng barel, tapos binarel niya yung katawan ni Ezeudu. Pero accidentally niya napatay yung 16-year-old son ni Ezeudu, which is yung nandito sa may tabi ni Ezeudu. And then, after nun, na-exile yung buong family ni Akonquo. And then, yun, hindi na sila So, after that, I mean, pumunta yung mga yung European missionaries and nagkaroon ng disrupt sa stability ng Umuopiya. And then leading to internal divisions kasi inintroduce ng European missionaries yung Christianity. Yung iba ina-accept yung Christianity, yung iba ayaw, lumayo ka sa akin. So, nagkaroon ng internal division between the Umuopiya village. And then after nun, hindi tinanggap yon ni Oconco kasi nga ang gusto ni Oconco is yung traditional lifestyle, yung traditional ganto lang, yung kung saan siya nasanay. So dahil doon sinunog sinunog niya yung simbahan, and then kinulong siya, after niya sinunog yung simbahan, kinulong siya, tapos kinausap siya ni J. Smith, then after nun, pinatay niya si J. Smith, tapos, parang sinisignal niya na makikipag-war siya dun sa European missionaries. Pero, dahil doon, yung mga kasama niya sa pagsunog ng simbahan, hindi siya sinamahan, parang hindi siya wala siyang backup, siya lang mag-isa. So, sinisimbolize yun sinisimbolize na hindi willing maging kakampi ng mga tribesmen si Oconco kasi yun nga, like malakas kasi yung so natakot din sila. And then yon, nung nalaman na hindi willing yung mga tribesmen na suportahan si Oconco, the next day si Oconco nagpakamatay. So sinisimbolize talaga yon yung deeper part um ng African literature. And then so next slide please. Next slide po. So, modern African literature in terms of language style. So, next. So, the colonization of Africa exposed African writers to some European language, which they use in their works. So, like what I have said earlier, nag-serve as a dynamic movement toward restoring and rediscovering African culture by providing a platform for authentic culture representation, language revitalization, and historical reconstruction. So the next is modern African literature is written using both native African and European language and dahil doon sa colonization. So next is although written African literature is more dominant in modern literature, oral lore or literature is not lost. So next is literary works of the ethnic groups Yoruba, Hausa, Zulu, and Soto in native languages still exist. So bakit nga ba nag-exist pa yon? Kasi yung native language writing in native language allows them to preserve the works of the authors, and yung mga works nila also serves as a baseline through which African people can relate their perspectives, challenges, and aspirations, pati yung mga struggles nila kasi yun nga, yung kasi nga nanggaling din yung mga authors sa same situation dati, kaya magkakaroon talaga ng idea kung bakit Kaya nagkakaroon pa rin ng preservation nagkakaroon pa rin ng preservation sa African literature dati hanggang ngayon. So, because of colonialism, African literature is heavily influenced by the West in terms of both style and language use. And then kasi writing in English, I mean, so it's self-explanatory, pero yun nga. Dahil nga, nagkaroon ng Western power during those colonial times, um, And dun lang kasi nag-revolve talaga yung literature and then yung experience ng Africa. Kaya dun na sila din nag-revolve sa literature nila. So, writers such as Masizi, Ngugi, and the late Okot first wrote some of their works in African language before translating them into English. Kasi writing in English allows the authors to reach a wider international audience. Kaya mainly ginagawa talaga 'to ng mga from native to English kaya to reach a wider international audience. So next slide. So it is common for many African writers to write in languages such as Portuguese and French. It is also important to know that while many African writers initially chose to write in colonial languages, nagkakaroon pa rin ng ongoing movement upang bawiin yung mga katutubong wika and to promote linguistic diversity in African literature. So the next is the West is a major factor in literary production of Africa. And then, like nasabi ko na yun kanina about, like Western colonization, kaya nagkaroon ng, like doon lang sila nag-revolve talaga. So Eurocentrism appears to propagate a trend to be modern is to be Western. So Eurocentrism, kung hindi niyo pa alam yung word na to, ito yung perspective that pinaprioritize ng European culture, ay pinaprioritize yung European culture and values that contributes to a trend where the concept is yung concept of modernity is closely associated with the Western ideals. So, in other words, yung may tendency talaga na i-view natin yung Western societies as the epitome, kumbaga, epitome of modernity, progress, and advancement, while yung mga other cultures and other societies, regions, ganito ganyan, may be considered less modern or even traditional. So, halimbawa, let's say sa Amerika, tinatawag natin sila ay super advanced na ganito ganyan. While Africa ay like may stereotype pa rin na tribes pa rin sila or nagamit pa rin sila ng pana at saka ng tawag doon? Spear or some ganon. So, ayun yung Eurocentrism. So, next is, after the European imperialism, African writers appropriated and used the language of the colonizers not to submit to Eurocentric details, but to celebrate their own unique identity amid modernization. So, yung era ng European imperialism, yung mga African writers deliberately adopted and utilized the languages introduced by the colonizer, not as a means of comforting to Eurocentric ideals, but rather as a tool para i-express and celebrate yung like unique identity nila in the face of ongoing modernization. So, next slide please. So, that would be all for this video. Join us next time as we continue to explore the world of literature and amplify the voices that is deserved to be heard. So, thank you and good night.